Your mind has no edge and science agrees. You probably think your consciousness, your awareness, the feeling of being you, lives somewhere inside your head. It feels like it's right behind your eyes, a pilot in the cockpit of your body. It's the most common sense idea in the world. But what if I told you that neuroscientists have searched the brain for a single center of consciousness and found nothing? This isn't a failure of science. It's a clue. It points to a radical and profound new way of thinking about the mind. What if your consciousness isn't in your brain at all? What if it isn't neatly contained inside your skull? If that's even remotely true, it could change everything we think we know about ourselves and our place in the universe. Section 1. The search for the ghost in the machine. For centuries, the basic assumption was simple. The brain creates consciousness. Scientists imagined that the network of 86 billion neurons firing away was like a generator, producing our subjective reality. So naturally, they went looking for a grand central station of awareness, a single spot where all our sensory information arrives and is magically turned into the movie of our life. They had some promising candidates. The prefrontal cortex, our hub for big decisions, seemed like a good bet. Others looked to the thalamus, which acts as a relay station for our senses. Some even had theories about mysterious thin sheets of neurons like the claustrum. But every time they thought they had it cornered, the truth was more complicated. A patient could lose large parts of their frontal lobe and still be conscious. While some ancient parts of the brain, like the brainstem, are critical for being awake versus being in a coma, sort of an on-off switch. The actual content of your awareness seems to be nowhere and everywhere at once. What neuroscientists have discovered is that consciousness isn't in one spot. Instead, it's associated with vast, distributed networks spread across the brain, particularly involving the cortex and thalamus. When you see the color red or feel a pang of sadness, there isn't one consciousness neuron that lights up. It's more like a symphony than a soloist. But this discovery, instead of solving the puzzle, just made it deeper. If the symphony is playing everywhere, who or what is actually listening to the music? This is what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness. Why do all these physical brain processes feel like something from the inside? The search for the seat of consciousness has led scientists to a startling place. There doesn't seem to be a throne. There is no single physical edge where awareness begins or ends. This has forced a monumental shift in thinking. The prevailing view is that consciousness is an emergent property of complex neural activity. But the lack of a clear answer has also opened the door to more speculative questions. Maybe we've been asking the wrong question all along. What if the brain doesn't just create consciousness? What if it also receives it? Section 2. Is the brain a radio? A controversial idea. Let's do a thought experiment. Think of a radio. It doesn't create the music it plays. The music exists as an invisible broadcast signal. The radio's job is to capture, filter, and translate that signal into sound. What if the brain is more like a radio than a generator? This is the core of an idea that, while not mainstream, is gaining some interest in the fringes of neuroscience: electromagnetic field theories of consciousness. Proposed by researchers like John Joe McFadden, these theories are controversial but fascinating. The argument goes like this: every time a neuron fires, it generates a tiny electrical pulse. Billions of neurons firing together create a synchronized, overall electromagnetic field, the very same energy that an EEG machine measures. According to the Conscious Electromagnetic Information, or CEMI field theory, this field isn't just a byproduct. It is the seat of consciousness. Proponents believe this idea could elegantly solve what's known as the binding problem, the mystery of how your brain combines separately processed information, sight, sound, emotion, into a single unified experience. An EM field is, by its nature, a unified whole. It's the conductor of the symphony, integrating all the scattered notes into one cohesive piece of music. This theory also makes a bold prediction. If consciousness is a field, it should be able to influence the physical brain. Proponents argue there is evidence for this, suggesting the brain's own EM field might be strong enough to influence when certain neurons fire, creating a feedback loop between the mind and the brain. However, many neuroscientists remain skeptical, arguing the brain's endogenous fields are generally too weak to have such a significant effect. While these field theories are far from proven and remain on the fringes of scientific consensus, they take us to our central mystery. If consciousness is a property of a field generated by the brain, what are its limits? We're getting into the very nature of reality and what it means to be human. If you're fascinated by these kinds of rabbit holes that challenge what we think we know, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. We explore big questions every week, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Section 3: The Incredible Shrinking Self. If your mind isn't entirely contained within your skull, where does it end? This brings us to what philosophers call the boundary problem. Why do we each feel like a private, individual awareness, walled off from everyone else? For thousands of years, contemplative and meditative traditions have described states of consciousness where the sense of a separate self completely dissolves. Practitioners report experiences of oneness or unity, where the boundary between me and the universe seems to fade away. Once dismissed as purely mystical, these experiences are now being studied with the tools of modern neuroscience. The findings are remarkable. Neuroimaging of long-term meditators shows that during these states of self-dissolution, brain networks associated with self-referential thought and the feeling of a physical boundary, like the posterior cingulate cortex, quiet down significantly. In other words, when the brain stops generating a strong signal of a separate me, the experience that emerges is one of boundarylessness. This aligns with the speculative idea that the brain might act as a kind of filter. In our normal, day-to-day lives, the brain is constantly reinforcing the feeling of being a distinct individual. It's a survival mechanism, but it seems possible to quiet this filtering mechanism. When you do, what people report experiencing is not a void, but an expansion. This suggests our ordinary, walled-in consciousness might be a special case, not the default. The boundary of the self might not be a fixed anatomical fact, but a fluid, dynamic process that our brains construct. Conclusion: the universe waking up? So, where does this all leave us? We started with a simple question. Where does your mind end? We've seen that scientists haven't found a single center of consciousness. Instead, it appears to be distributed across the brain's networks. We've explored a controversial but interesting theory that consciousness might exist in the brain's electromagnetic field. And we've seen how the subjective experience of self-dissolution in meditation challenges our fixed ideas about where we end and the rest of the world begins. The mainstream scientific consensus is that consciousness is a product of the brain. But the evidence, from the puzzles of neuroscience to the reports from ancient contemplative traditions, points toward the same mind-bending question. Is the feeling of being a solid, separate self, located behind your eyes, the whole story? We are at a fascinating point in science, where we are forced to confront the deepest mysteries of existence. This isn't just a scientific debate. It has staggering implications for who we are. If the boundary of your mind is more fluid than it feels, it means that on some level, the separation between you and the universe might not be as clear-cut as it seems. So the next time you look in the mirror, ask yourself, is the awareness looking back at you truly, completely contained behind your eyes? Or are you a unique window through which the universe is experiencing itself? The edges of your mind might be far wider than you've ever dared to imagine.